I don't know how to say it, but after last night, I feel different. I seem to see ahead in a kind of way. I know we are going to take a very long road into darkness, but I know I can't turn back. It isn't to see elves now, nor dragons, nor mountains that I want. I don't rightly know what I want, but I have something to do before the end, and it lies ahead, not in the Shire. I must see it through, sir, if you understand me. Welcome to the Wayward Wizards podcast. I'm Zach.
And I'm Logan.
And this week we're reading Book 1, Chapter 4, A Shortcut to Mushrooms. A little bit of a breezier chapter this week than the last few chapters.
Yeah, a little less harrowing and I was struck that these books are about walking mostly.
Yeah.
So if you're not interested in walking, it's
just camping.
Yeah, walking and camping. Stopping occasionally for a meal. But yeah, so they walk. They wake up in Woodhall, which I have a question about for you later. But they wake up in Woodhall. They also have left some food, and they get on the road pretty quickly after that.
Frodo sleeps in, which bad form. Frodo sleeping in.
Yeah, Frodo sleeps in. But that being said, he also is, he's feeling some anxiety. He wants to get on the road. He says, we need to get to Buckleberry Ferry by this evening. And he's pretty put off by any suggestion that they should, lollygag. And even suggest a shortcut, which ends up being less of a shortcut than he had hoped.
Not quite disastrous, because it all kind of works out, but not the shortest shortcut.
Right, it's not a shortcut, but it also maybe keeps them safe. There's something interesting there, right? Like they end up spending more time walking, but maybe they're safer in the long run.
Right.
And then we get to see Farmer Maggot. And
the worst name in the Lord of the Rings, Farmer Maggot.
Yeah, what a terrible.
That has always been such a weird hiccup for me when I'm reading. Ever since I was a little kid, I'd be like, Farmer what now? what a terrible
name is Maggot. Yeah.
I did a little bit of reading on why Tolkien named him Maggot, and we can get to that.
So they have breakfast. Pippin is kind of, how to describe him? He's, cantankerous is the wrong word. He's just a little, he's kind of ribbing Frodo here.
Yeah. There's more of the taking the piss out of Frodo.
Yeah, exactly. Taking the piss is perfect.
Like he's, you slept in. I was going to eat all the food, but Sam made me save some for you.
He has no respect for Frodo. It's so great.
Yeah.
I love that Frodo, he keeps asking Frodo questions and about Gildor and about the elves and about what they talked about. And Frodo.
Oh yeah, you're so right.
Frodo gets upset and says Frodo sharply, and now leave me in peace for a bit. I don't want to answer a string of questions while I'm eating. I want to think. And Pippin says, good heavens, at breakfast?
That's so great. It's so great. Yeah, he is just kind of peppering him with questions.
Yeah.
And Frodo's responses are just getting bitchier and bitchier. Well, first of all, so we have to remember Pippin is not fully in the know.
Yeah.
As far as Frodo knows.
Right.
During the next chapter, Conspiracy Unmasked, we kind of find out that Pippin kind of knew all along.
Yeah.
That Frodo wasn't going to be living at Crick Hollow, but yeah, as far as Frodo knows, Pippin doesn't know everything. And so Pippin's kind of getting like a little bit closer and closer to the truth in a way that's making him like more and more uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But I love that he says like, did you ask him about the Black Riders? And then he's like, did you ask him about the sniffing? Like he's kind of
The
fixated on the
sniffing.
sniffing.
Yeah, that's right. He
Like
finds
last
that so
chapter, he said like,
strange.
don't forget to ask about the sniffing. He's just
Right.
like very like, it's like, what is going on with these like sniffing big people whose faces we still haven't seen? Um, because spoiler alert, they don't have any faces, but
Right.
um, yeah, I love that good heavens at breakfast line really took me out
Yeah.
this reading. I was like, that's just really funny. Um, but yeah, then Frodo, he has this moment of like kind of like moody reflection over his breakfast. He's kind of silently eating, and he decides, I can't actually take Sam with me. Like I really need to give him an out.
Yeah.
He says the inheritance is mine alone. I don't think I should even take Sam. And so he basically tries to get Sam to quit, but Sam is having none of that.
This is right after Gilder told him, go
Take
with
his
your
take his
friends.
friends. Yeah,
Yeah.
but he's like, nah, like I really can't. Like this is my burden to bear. I'm not gonna like kill Sam,
Right.
and like I think like I think he's just kind of recognizing the stakes now that he's actually like faced a little bit of danger.
Right.
He's maybe like questioning the wisdom of putting Sam in danger as well.
Yeah.
But he kind of eases into it and he's like, hey, so how'd you feel about meeting those elves, Sam? And
Hmm.
Sam's like, oh, they were great, sir. He just falls over himself talking about how great they were and how wonderful they were. But I love that Frodo said, do you like them still now that you've had a closer view? And
Yeah.
Sam says, they seem a bit above my likes and dislikes, so to speak. It don't seem to matter what I think about them. They are quite different from what I expected. So old and young, so gay and sad, as it were.
Hmm.
And I think it's interesting. Like Sam is really touched by this experience. It's something that he's wanted his whole life without really even knowing what exactly it is that he wanted. But he's changed after this experience. The bit that we started with, he says, uh, I don't know how to say it, but after last night, I feel different. I seem to see ahead in a kind of way.
Hmm.
It's almost like his like brush with these powerful beings has kind of rubbed off on him, and he's different because of it.
Yeah, and the elves kind of give him a charge,
Yeah,
where where it really, if he wasn't kind of welded to Frodo's cause before, he is after he has this conversation with the elves, and he says, "If you don't come back, sir, then I shan't. That's certain," said Sam. "Don't you leave him," they said to me. "Leave him," I said. "I never mean to. I am going with him. If he climbs to the moon. And if any of those black riders try to stop him, they'll have Sam Gamgee to reckon with," I said. They laughed. If he climbs to the moon, even if he does something impossible, um,
yeah,
which the whole thing is impossible.
yeah,
but
yeah.
but climbing to the moon is certainly impossible. I mean, what year is he writing this again?
This is probably about 1939,
Yeah,
1940. So good like 30 years almost before we Americans landed on the moon in
right.
69.
Yeah,
But by the time this book was published in 54, so that's a solid 15 years before
right.
we landed on the moon. So yeah, it's interesting. I think it'd be really interesting to like do a study across like literature over time, like when people first start talking about going to the moon, and if it's like this completely fantastical, impossible task. Whereas
Yeah,
now, like if something doesn't work well, like for decades now, we've said we've put a man on the moon, but we
right.
can't make a printer that prints properly, or we put a
Right.
man on the moon, but we can't come up with like a peanut butter that spreads properly, or like
Yeah, and
uh,
I would even say, like, when do we start? When do we start to think about the moon as a place?
oh,
You know,
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
or even as an object.
Yeah, a place we could go to. Yeah,
A
you're so
place we
right.
could go, a place that would be visitable, much less to conceive of the idea of actually doing that. But you're right. He does. Sam gets a little more serious in this chapter.
Yeah, yeah,
He's not. He's and Sam is not a frivolous character.
no,
There's really a, and I wouldn't necessarily describe Pippin as frivolous, but he's just so much more lighthearted. Both Merry
yeah.
and Pippin than Sam. Sam is a
Sam is
serious guy.
more grounded,
Yeah,
as would befit a potato farmer, I guess, a gardener.
yeah,
Uh, uh, yeah, but Pippin. We kind of talked about class a little bit. I think this will come up, like when we meet Maggot here in a few minutes. But, um, Pippin is not a working class hobbit.
mm-hmm.
Neither is Frodo. And because of that, I think that he kind of like has the privilege to be frivolous in a way
Yeah,
that Sam doesn't. Like he, this is all. It still kind of comes off as like a lark for him. He's
yeah,
just kind of off helping his cousin, whereas Sam kind of already understands, I think, the kind of the seriousness of the quest that they're on, and kind of doesn't have the same patience for like Sam. Like as far as I know, Sam doesn't ever joke around. In the way
yeah.
that Pippin and Merry and Frodo do.
He
Like
certainly
Sam
isn't.
doesn't really participate in the taking of the piss, as we might say. Like,
Yeah, he's not included in that kind of banter.
yeah,
Um,
he's not ribbing, Merry and Pippin and calling them
right.
like rich assholes or something.
Yeah.
He's not got that kind of equality with the rest of them. So they're kind of
No.
able to make fun of him, but he's not really able to make fun of them.
Yeah.
They're able to make fun of each other, Frodo, Sam, and Merry. But Sam is kind of like beneath them in the hierarchy, so he's not able to do that.
Right. All right. So they got 18 miles to go. We were talking last week about, you can
Yeah,
walk about 20 miles in a day. So and they get to a deeply dug bed with steep, slippery slides. And Pippin says, "First check." He's like,
yeah,
"Told you."
yeah. Like, hey, yeah, it's this is about as easy as it's going to get for the rest of the way.
Mm-hmm.
But pretty soon, you see that it's actually good that they're in this hard Scrabble country, because
Yeah.
they look up, and just in time, they're out of sight. They look up, and on the edge high above them, they saw against the sky a horse standing. Beside it stooped a black figure.
Mm-hmm.
It says the shortcut has gone crooked already, but we got under cover only just in time.
Yeah. It's a pretty striking image. This image of a horse against the sky with a stooped black figure. And then they stop under an elm tree. It says, its leaves, though fast turning yellow, were still thick, and the ground at its feet was fairly dry and sheltered. When they came to make their meal, they found that the elves had filled their bottles with a clear drink, pale golden in color. It had the scent of honey made of many flowers, and was wonderfully refreshing. Do we take this to be mead, some kind of elvish mead?
Yeah, it's definitely in my notes I call it elf liquor.
Elf
Like,
liquor.
yeah,
Cool.
that good elf liquor.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and it's refreshing. Pretty soon they're snapping their fingers at the rain
Yeah, it's so
and at
funny.
black riders.
Right.
And this is the last few miles they felt would soon be behind them. They're like, it encourages them. It gives
Yeah.
them like renewed
Sort of
vigor.
fortifies you in somehow.
Yeah, I mean, so it's more than just being drunk. I mean, I think it probably is making them a little drunk, because they start
Yeah.
singing about drinking.
Right.
Like right after this, the kind of
Right.
one of the other famous Hobbit songs. But yeah. I mean, this also starts kind of a long tradition in the book of magic food that
Yes.
that vivifies you. like famously we'll get to Limbos, when they get to uh, uh, Galadriel and company, and
Hmm.
they're given this fortifying food. Um, but the kind of the mirror image of this is when Merry and Pippin are abducted later in the Two Towers, they're forced to drink orc liquor, which
Yeah, it's like
also kind
awful.
of keeps them alive, but it's just god awful stuff. And
Yeah.
so I think it's an interesting parallel. And Gandalf gives them like kind of a vivifying liquor when they're in the snow coming up
Oh, that's right.
towards the
Kind
end
of
of
keep
this book.
keeps them warm. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's something about like kind of this like kind of special like semi magical liquor that
Yeah.
kind of keeps people alive. And I don't know if it's like supposed to be just alcohol
Hmm.
or kind of like a potion of some type. But yeah, it's definitely gets them up in spirits enough that they sing this kind of famous Hobbit drinking song, which I definitely memorized from the movies as a kid.
So um we go from being afraid, right, seeing this figure on the ridge, to stopping for a meal. And they're, I mean, they're hobbits, right? But like, you don't skip a meal. This was frightening, but you stop, you unpack your pack, and you eat the meal. And it's even, it's not just the meal. It's this elvish liquor, but stopping for the meal is like an important part of like keeping yourself going,
Yeah,
not just not just physically, but there's like something spiritual about it, I think. And we go
yeah,
from fear to the meal, you know, singing at the top of our lungs about drinking. And then almost immediately it says they stopped short suddenly. Frodo sprang to his feet. A long drawn wail came down the wind like the cry of some evil and lonely creature. It rose and fell and ended on a high, piercing note. Even as they sat and stood as if suddenly frozen, it was answered by another cry, fainter and further off, but no less chilling to the blood. Then there was a silence broken only by the sound of the wind and the leaves. And Frodo says later, just a couple lines later, it was a call or a signal. There were words in that cry, though I could not catch them.
yeah.
So I
This is like the
think,
first indication I think that there's more than one Black
yeah,
Rider.
more than one Black Rider, and that they're communicating with each other somehow.
Yeah,
We know that they can talk. They
right.
don't just make horrible sounds, but they also
Sniffing.
communicate with each other over long distance. Um, with this awfulness. Um, but it's interesting to me that the first Black Rider that we see, and then this experience of the Black Riders is punctuated by a meal, laughter, song, and even a little
Yeah,
bit of like, you know, light drunkenness. They're sort of buzzed.
yeah.
Um,
Just they're drunk enough that they forget that they're supposed to be like on a clandestine
yeah,
mission.
exactly.
So much for like cutting through the woods and like keeping a low profile.
I know
They're singing loudly.
they're such like fools, in a
Yeah,
way. And then we're told that they're all thinking of the riders, but no one spoke of them. They're like too afraid to talk about it. And it says they were now reluctant either to stay or go on, but sooner or later they had to
mm,
get across the open country to the ferry, and it was best to go sooner in the daylight. So once they start walking, their fear leaves them, even though they're cutting across open country. Um, and they're expecting to see, distant figures of horsemen and things like that. But it's almost like their movement causes things to happen in nature, where it
yeah,
says the sun was escaping from breaking clouds as it sank toward the hills they had left. It was now shining brightly again, and fear left them, even though they still felt uneasy. So
yeah,
even though they have this, they're prevaricating, right? Like they don't want to leave the shelter where they are, but they're also reluctant to stay there. but the momentum is toward leaving. They must leave, and when they do leave, they're greeted by the sun. I think Tolkien's telling us something there about life. Like you
Yeah,
gotta
yeah.
like put one foot
You got to
in
keep moving.
again, like the book is about walking. This is what this book is about. Is
Yeah,
walking.
yeah.
And so like it's just like and Augustine says it is solved by walking. And I think that's kind of partly what's going on here. Um, that even though you're striking out into whatever, into danger, um, walking through it is part of the deal. And that's how they end up at Farmer Maggot's land. So
Yeah, and it's like, they weren't expecting to end up in Maggot's land. They were expecting to just like get straight to the ferry. But by the time they get to Maggot, like they're still a long way away from the ferry. Like that the shortcut wasn't like, it probably saved their skins because they weren't like waylaid by the Black Rider on the road, but they are also just like, oh my god, we are not even close to where we were trying to get to, and
I
it's
think it's
already.
like I think it says it's like 5 miles
Yeah,
from Maggot's
we
land.
should note when we get there just how far away it still is, but
Yeah, yeah,
uh yeah, we get introduced to Maggot, who's just like such a funny character.
yeah. He is funny.
They look around and Pippin's like, oh, this is Bamfurlong, old Farmer Maggot's land. That's his farm way up there in the trees.
Mm.
And Frodo says, one trouble after another. Like in his mind, Maggot is like just as dangerous
they're on the
as
same
a
level.
Black Rider.
Black Rider's Farmer Maggot. Yeah.
Yeah. And we find out that, like Frodo, when he was just a young lad, used to steal mushrooms from Maggot's property,
so
and that Maggot, which like does not hold up to 21st century child's
no.
discipline, norms. He
No.
grabs Frodo, holds him in front of his vicious dogs.
It says he beats him. He beats
him. He beats him, and then he dangles him in front of his vicious dogs and says, "Next time you see him, eat him."
Oh my god.
Oh, terrifying! You can hardly blame Frodo for being absolutely terrified.
Definitely.
See, lads, next time this young varmint sets foot on my land, you can eat him. Now see him off.
That's so funny.
Oh, but Pippin, and like kind of like showing that he still kind of doesn't. He still, at least he's like feigning to Frodo that he doesn't understand like the nature of what's going on. But he says, "Well, it's time that you made it up, especially if you're coming back to live in Buckland. Old Maggot really is a stout fellow if you leave his mushrooms alone." So he's like, "Hey man, you're about to be neighbors with this guy. You really got to put away this like 30-year long beef that you have with this old farmer, whose property you stole," which I think is just I think it's great. But yeah, Maggot meets them after they're met first by his dogs, who sound terrifying. I mean, I'm not like particularly afraid of dogs, but I think we've all had that experience of like kind of like being face to face with a dog that's growling at you and you don't know if it's about to just like bite your face.
Right.
And
I'm imagining like mastiffs,
yeah.
Like,
just like, I mean,
just big junkyard dogs,
yeah. Like the dog from the Sandlot.
That's exactly what I was going to say. A big mastiff like the dog from the Sandlot, except, and they're like the same size as a regular mastiffs, except next to a hobbit. And it's like extra terrifying. Like a mastiff could eat a hobbit, like,
yeah. Yeah. It says that the dogs, they growl at Sam and Frodo, but they take no notice of Pippin.
Yeah. It's like they know Pippin.
So that's how Maggot greets them first with his dogs, and he says, "Who may you be, and what may you be wanting?" What an interesting sentence construction.
Yes.
Who may you be, and what may you be wanting? So he even he talks like in this like kind of down to earth, kind of just a different way. And Pippin says, good afternoon, Mr. Maggot. Like you can just almost like hear it. Like, it's like poor Sam and Frodo are like pissing their pants because this dog is just growling down their faces. And Pippin's just like, oh, hey, Mr. Maggot. And Maggot's happy to see him.
Yeah. If it isn't Master Pippin, Mr. Peregrine Took, I should say. There's some old-fashioned way of addressing a Master Pippin is a young person of higher station than you.
Yeah.
But Mr. Peregrine Took would mean that you're an adult.
Yeah, it's like a slightly more formal way of greeting. Like he recognizes like, okay, you're the landed gentry of this area, and I'm a person of maybe more importance than Sam,
right?
But I'm still below you, and it's interesting. Like calling someone Mr. Is kind of the same as calling them Master. Like it has like the same roots. If you call someone Mr. something, or it's like the same as like calling him Master. But yeah, you're right. Like calling him with his proper name. Pippin is just his nickname. So that might be how he would refer to him when he was a child. I think you're right. Like Master Pippin, but then, being like, oh, I should say, Mr. Peregrine Took, he kind of like catches himself and corrects himself with the more formal greeting.
Yeah. And there's an interesting respect. Pippin has a lot of respect for Farmer Maggot, I think, as a person in the community, as an elder. But there's definitely a social dynamic there that's pretty thick and interesting. And so Mr. Maggot says, I was just going out to set my dogs on any strangers. There's some funny things going on today. And it seems like maybe he's had some folk wandering across his land who he's not too excited about.
Yeah, he refers to somebody as outlandish, which I think, like in Hobbit speak, is just about the worst thing you could call someone.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and we're about to get a little insight into like the way that the different towns of the Shire view each other.
Yep.
Which we got quite a bit in the first couple of chapters, but I think this like drives it even further home that the people in Hobbiton distrust people over there, who bother with boats and all that.
Vice versa.
And but it seems like the people of Crick Hollow and Brandy Hall, they have a similar view of those outlandish people over there in Hobbiton. You don't want to go getting yourself all mixed up with those weird Hobbiton people. But yeah, this is a funny thing. Okay, so Pippin is talking to Maggot, and they know each other by sight, but the other two are still strangers. And so Pippin goes to introduce Frodo and Sam to Maggot, and he starts to, it says let me find it. Pippin introduced the other two to the farmer. Mr. Frodo Baggins, he said. You may not remember him, but he used to live at Brandy Hall. At the name Baggins, the farmer started and gave Frodo a sharp glance. And he says, you better come with me, because we got some things to discuss. And I think for sure Frodo here is like already shaking in his boots. He thinks like, oh, like now he's going to like feed me to his dogs for the mushrooms that I stole 30 years ago. But, we find out that, a person came looking for Baggins earlier that day.
Right.
And that, it's clearly a Black Rider. And, they're sipping beer and they're just like kind of sitting and talking. There's like a little side note saying that even though they missed the beer at the Golden Perch, that this beer was pretty good. But Sam is a little distrustful of drinking the beer of somebody who would have like sicked his dogs on his master. So, like he's just like a little bit like sketched out by Maggot still, this person who lives far away, from where he's used to, and someone who was like mean to Mr. Frodo all those years ago. He's not sure. But he describes this interaction with this Black Rider. The Black Rider comes The dogs go out to, you know, be guard dogs like usual, but they shrink away and run away like they've been stung the moment that they see him. And then he has this like really chilling conversation with them, where he doesn't like the look of him from the beginning, and he says like, you know, hey, wherever you're going, the road is probably the best place to go.
This lane don't lead anywhere.
Yeah, like, yeah, nowhere but trouble, if you catch my meaning. Like, you know, like, and once again, you have this like little 3-foot nothing, you know, little hobbit guy standing up to this horsed, tall person.
Huge figure in black.
Just the gall of it all. You know, like these hobbits, they're made of tough stuff.
Well, he and the gaffer are kind of made of the same stuff, you know, that
exactly. They're both farmers.
They're both farmers, and as much as, you know, Sam and Farmer Maggot think that they don't have anything in common because they're from different parts of the Shire, they're really, I mean, they share all these traits, you know, that are so admirable.
Yeah, they're both people of the earth. I guess we could like draw a distinction between a gardener and a farmer. You know, one is more like hyper local versus someone who's like making like a production level amount of food. But so maybe he's like a little bit above in station to Sam.
Yeah.
But really not. They're very similar people. And I think you're right. The interaction between the gaffer and the Black Rider and Maggot and the Black Rider is just a perfect indication of that. They're both just like, they're gosh, how do you pronounce this word? Inimitable.
Yeah, I think that's correct. Yeah.
They are inimitable. Like they will not be intimidated by anybody, regardless if they're twice their size and on a huge freaking horse.
Yeah.
Just like look out for these tough as nails old gardeners. But yeah, the guy, the Black Rider, who he can't see his face because he doesn't have a face. He says, "Have you seen Baggins?" And he says, "Be off. There are no Bagginses here. You're in the wrong part of the Shire." Yeah.
That's so good.
You'd better get back west of Hobbiton, but you can go by road this time. And then he says, Baggins has left. He is coming. He is not far away. I wish to find him. If he passes by, will you tell me? I will come back with gold. So he tries to like bribe him with gold, but Maggot is like, you know, get out of here. Double quick. I'll give you 1 minute before I call my dogs. And he hisses and leaves.
The Black Rider uses these sentences that are like, you know, less than 5 words. I come from yonder. Have you seen Baggins? Baggins has left. He is coming. He is not far away. I wish to find him. It's really chilling. Like, like they're not practiced, you know, in communicating like this, and it's all about the utility of the conversation.
It's like it's hard for him to talk because he doesn't have a body. You know, it takes a lot of effort for him to say anything above a hiss or a wail. But yeah, you know, Maggot, he has this insight that I think is really interesting. You know, we keep talking about plain hobbit sense, but he's a smart guy, you know, and he essentially, like, after that interaction where he's just like, Baggins, like I haven't heard of a Baggins in, you know, decades. Like, what are you looking for a Baggins? Like that crazy guy Bilbo, like he's, you know, miles away up in Hobbiton, like, you know, where all those other crazy people live.
Right.
But then Frodo showing up on his door, it's like he's like seeing a ghost. He's like, what in the world?
Yeah,
like I just heard. So he's like something is up, right? Like things like this don't happen in my neck of the woods very often. So he says, you should never have gone mixing yourself up with them Hobbiton folks, Mr. Frodo. Folk are queer up there. Sam stirred in his chair and looked at the farmer with an unfriendly eye. But he says, you know, you were always a reckless lad. And he says, you know, all this comes from those strange doings of Mr. Bilbo. His money was got in some strange fashion in foreign parts, they say. Maybe there's some that want to know what has become of the gold and jewels that he buried in the hill at Hobbiton, as I hear.
Yeah.
And he's freaking right. Like that is exactly what has happened.
Yep.
You know, he doesn't know that, you know, one of the pieces of treasure that Bilbo got was a ring of power.
Right.
and that the Dark Lord is searching for it. But he's dead on. He's like, oh, Bilbo went off and got some treasure in some ill-gotten way, and that always comes with trouble. It'll have to be paid for.
Exactly. It'll have to be paid for. Exactly. That's the callback, is it'll have to be paid for. And it's again, and that's what the people in Hobbiton think too.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
Yeah.
again, it's this shared Hobbit culture, of just distrust of outsiders and I mean, Farmer Maggot doesn't even like that he lives too close to the river. He's like, too close to the river. Whoa.
Yeah. It's bizarre.
but yeah, it'll have to be paid for is the overarching theme here.
That good Hobbit sense. But he's like, thank God that you are like coming back to Buckland.
Where you belong.
My advice is stay here and don't get mixed up with all these outlandish folk.
Mm-hmm.
So he's like comparing the people in Hobbiton to the Black Riders themselves. Like, he just called the Black Rider outlandish.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
So Sam does not like this.
No.
And I think it's interesting because there's this like, I texted you last night, like as I was preparing for this, to like remind me to tell you my thoughts about Maggot. But it's like, we have this like class structure. We got Frodo on top. He's the master of Bag End. You got Sam all the way on the bottom. And then all the other characters are kind of in between.
Right.
Merry and Pippin are like the landed gentry of that area. And then you have Farmer Maggot, who's below them, but still above Sam. And he looks down on Sam because Sam is from Hobbiton. Whereas like the other three, are at least like originally from the Buckland area. But Sam is like a native Hobbiton guy.
Right.
And he's not important in the social structure. And so Maggot never says Sam's name.
Yeah. Fascinating.
And as far as I can tell, they don't say a word to each other. Sam is just kind of dutifully sitting there. But, he offers, finally to take everybody to the ferry in his wagon, which is like a great offer because it's going to like keep them from getting discovered by any people they don't want to see on the road.
Yeah.
Namely Black Riders.
Mm-hmm.
But the way that Maggot says it is so funny to me. He says, I've got a notion. It's near sundown already, and we are going to have our supper, but we mostly go to bed soon after the sun. If you and Mr. Peregrine and all could stay and have a bite with us, we would be pleased.
And all.
You and Mr. Peregrine and all. There's only 3 of them there.
Yeah.
He's talking to Frodo, so he says, you, Mr. Peregrine, and everybody else.
Yeah.
And it's just Sam.
It's like a total dismissal of his like presence.
And
and whoever else might happen to come.
Yeah, whatever peasants are like, with you can also tag along. I didn't really even count how many of them there were. I think there may have been 1 or 2 or whatever. I just think that is so funny. But what I noticed, because that really stuck out to me this time.
Yeah.
And I was like, why doesn't he just say Sam's name?
Right.
But then I went back and looked, and Pippin starts to introduce Frodo and Sam to Maggot. And he starts to he says, and then I'm just going to read the thing. He says, Pippin introduced the other 2 to the farmer. Mr. Frodo Baggins, he says, you may not remember him, but he used to live at Brandy Hall. And at that moment, Maggot like realizes like, Baggins, you guys better come with me. So Pippin never gets around to introducing Sam.
Yeah.
Like Maggot doesn't know Sam's name because like Frodo and Pippin didn't bother to tell him what Sam's name was.
Yeah. And they get so caught up in the, in the story about the Black Rider and all of that, then, that it never comes up and nobody ever thinks to ask, because Sam is, there's a way in which
he's just not very important.
Sam is kind of like a dog in some ways, like the way that he relates to Frodo and the way that he
they call him a dog a couple times actually.
Yeah. The way that he's pretty suspicious, terrible. Of Farmer Maggot, and the idea that I'm going to drink this beer, but I'm not going to enjoy it too much because he beat up my master at some point in the past.
Yeah, it might be poisoned.
Right.
He begrudgingly admits that it was actually like pretty good beer.
Oh, poor Sam. Well, since we're since we're talking so much about Farmer Maggot, I wanted you to get into Maggot's name and sort of what you found about why he may be called Maggot.
Well, okay. I mean, I think like Maggot is such a terrible name to give a character, especially a
Yeah.
character who's like so like he's a great character, but
Yeah.
Maggot
Right.
just nobody like it's a terrible sounding word. You know, we associate it with worms
Yeah.
or like larvae. We
And like
associate it with
rotting.
rotting.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Rotting meat. Right.
molding bread. You know, and uh yeah, so I did a little bit of digging into Maggot, and Tolkien, as like people started to translate Lord of the Rings into different languages, he put together this document which you can find for free online called the nomenclature,
Hmm.
where he just like breaks down like all the like proper nouns essentially in Lord of the Rings and gives instructions on whether they should be left alone as is and just transliterated into the language that it's
Mm-hmm.
being translated into, or if it's you know, if they can change it to match like another local or like a particular word of a noun in that language. And sometimes he said like, you know, it's better for you to like use indigenous word, and sometimes he says just leave this completely alone. So uh you know, it's kind of like when you're, if you were ever watching like Telemundo or something on TV and you'd be listening to an advertisement and you wouldn't understand a word of it, and then suddenly the word McDonald's will jump
Yeah.
out at you
Right.
like you know, McDonald's,
Right. Yeah.
you know, it like you don't change the word McDonald's into Spanish, you just keep it
Right.
McDonald's. And Maggot, he said to keep it. He said essentially it's just a hobbit name, you know,
I
and
see.
it's not you know, related to grubs or worms or anything like that.
Oh, interesting.
It's just a name that he thought sounded like something that a hobbit would like the sound of. So
Ah,
it's clearly, but the weird thing about that. So he says, don't change it into another word in your language. Leave it as maggot.
right.
Um, or so like basically he's saying like don't translate it as like worms,
Right.
you know, in your language. Um, but the weird thing about it is that maggots are referred to a few times in Lord of the Rings
Interesting.
as maggots, and it's almost always related to orcs.
Yeah, really strange. I mean, so he's trying to, he just likes the musicality of the word.
He thinks it's a beautiful word,
He
maggot.
likes,
He
and
just thinks,
it's fun to say. Maggot is fun to say.
yeah, and it's
It's
got like kind of a hobbit like maggot. You know, it's got
yeah,
kind of a,
it's got the like G's and then that hard T at the end. It's got that. It's nice, but it's strange that he could have found a similarly kind of alliterative, word.
yeah,
Um,
something that would be way better than maggot. But like,
Maggot.
so I did like a search to find like every, because I vaguely remembered, I was like, um, the word maggot is used in very negative connotations in Lord of the Rings
Right.
several times, and we actually like we just had one with Gollum.
Oh,
Um, says Gollum wormed his way into the mountains like a maggot.
yeah.
Like just
Right.
we just had that one. And then the rest of the maggot like used as like an adjective are always related to orcs. So like you have maggot holes being like where the orcs live.
Mm-hmm.
When they threaten to stab the hobbits at one point, they say, I'll put some maggot holes in you. Like, yeah, maggot is like a very negative term throughout the rest of the book. So I just think it's a funny thing that, but there's a few Tolkien names where you're just like, all right, like what? Okay, why do you got to call him Maggot? Farmer
Right.
Maggot, that's a terrible name. Wormtongue is another one.
Yeah. Wormtongue is telegraphing who that guy is for sure.
That's just a terrible
Um,
name. I mean, like, oh, I wonder if we should trust this character. Oh, what's his name? Wormtongue? Yeah, no,
yeah.
I don't think I'm gonna like that guy.
I wonder if, I mean, I know that in the nomenclature, you're saying that Tolkien is, it just seems like something a Hobbit would like. It would make sense to a Hobbit for that to be a name.
Yeah.
But we don't get his first name, do we? Is
Oh,
it?
I don't think so. I don't
And
think so.
so it's also, I think, rarer to have a
Even his wife
last.
just calls him Maggot.
Yeah, a last. Maybe it's his first name. I mean, it's strange to have a name that just
I
isn't
don't
doesn't
think
have
so.
a meaning. You know what I mean? And
Farmer is his first
Farmer
name. Yeah.
Maggot. Yeah, his first name is Farmer. And so that I wonder if Tolkien isn't kind of trying to like, play with the tone here.
Yeah, maybe.
Or at least when they come upon his land, like, oh, this is Farmer Maggot's land, and
Yeah.
Frodo feels all of this kind of foreboding about it, and so you're like, well, who's Farmer Maggot? That sounds horrible. But then it lets him kind of upset your expectations for how this might go. He's got these
Yeah.
scary dogs, yada yada, but then actually it turns out that he's going to invite him to dinner. He's going to put out dinner for 14 people. It says it's like this huge.
Good God, I know. Yeah,
It's like this huge meal, and it's like the whole household.
he's probably trying to marry off his daughters to Merry and Frodo.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Little social climbing happening, but yeah, there's something going on there. It isn't just a name that he liked. I don't think. I think it's a little.
There's a few other names that Tolkien chose that were kind of just like unfortunate. Maggot and Wormtongue are the two that come straight to mind. But there's a place in the Silmarillion called Tel Porno, which is just a terrible, like, Tel Porno. It's like,
Tel
what?
Porno?
Yeah, it's like, that doesn't really land on 21st century ears very well.
Well, I mean, porn comes from, I think, porneo in Latin or Greek.
Pornea, yeah.
And so it's not like, I mean, Tolkien would have known the connotation there, but maybe he was a little too chaste or something to go there.
He just he's like, what a beautiful name. What a beautiful name. But then there's a mountain in Valinor called Tuna.
Yeah.
Which just like, when we hear the word tuna, we immediately think of like the can of like fish, exactly. So like, yeah, there's a few things where it's just like, yeah, it's musical.
Just kind of clangs though.
Yeah, it's just kind of like, yeah, maybe it was like beautiful in 1937, but now it's kind of got a different ring to it. But
definitely.
But Maggot, he turns out to be an upstanding guy because he's like,
great dude.
Hey, Mr. Frodo and Mr. Pippin and everybody else, you guys can all come with me in my cart, and they have dinner. It's this great dinner. They're fed really well, and then they're loaded up in the cart. Farmer Maggot's wife is like, don't you go getting yourself all mixed up with big people, Maggot. And he goes, I won't. And then they leave. They just go off on the road. So they load up in his cart, and they go off. And it says that it was 5 miles or more from Maggot's Lane to the ferry.
Yeah. 5 miles.
They hear the clop, clop, clop of a rider after some time, and they say, what do you want and where are you going? And he says, I want Baggins. Have you seen him? And so, of course, we expect this to be a black rider. But, of course, it's just Mr. Merry.
Mr. Merry Brandybuck. A dark lantern was uncovered, and its light fell on an astonished face of the farmer. Mr. Merry! Who do you think it was? Merry has no idea. And he was really just on his way to dinner. So it's just fortune that they happened to run into each other at this time.
Yeah, and he was worried sick about him. He was just about to have supper, but then he decided to go and check the ditches to make sure they hadn't fallen in.
So
Denny.
Yeah, so he says, where'd you find him? In your duck pond? So now, Mary's also making fun. And I caught him trespassing and nearly set my dogs on him. And then I know we're getting toward the end of the chapter, but I want to pull out this word. Maggot says that, he better be getting home. Mrs. Maggot will be worriting with the night getting thick. I wonder if that's just a vernacular you
It's
know,
it's a vernacular worrying. Yeah, it's like a
Worriton.
country way of saying worrying.
So funny.
Worriton. Yeah.
Worriton with the night getting
Yeah.
thick.
Uh,
And it
Trespassing is another one. At different parts in the book, like people will say traipsing.
traipsing. I
Um,
love that word traipsing. Yeah.
yeah, you have like traipsing, wording. It's like kind of like the country way of saying it. But you missed another like maggot slight to Sam.
Oh.
Uh, Mary says, where'd you find him in your duck pond? He says, no, I found him trespassing, and they'll tell you all about it. Uh,
Oh.
Now, if you'll excuse me, Mr. Merry and Mr. Frodo and all, I'd best be turning back home. There's only one other person there, Maggot. His name is Samwise
Sam.
Gamgee, and he is a person. All right? Like,
He's
Maggot.
just hard-headed. Yeah.
And he's like, oh, yeah, Mr. Merry and Mr. Frodo and
Peregrine, he's
Mr. Peregrine, and
Yeah.
and that other guy that's with you, your little simple farmer.
This curly-haired guy over here.
Wearing his stupid hat. And
he says, I really love the way that he says goodbye. I'd like to read it if I can.
Please.
He backed the wagon into the lane and turned it. Well, good night to you all, he said. It's been a queer day and no mistake, but all's well as ends well, though perhaps we should not say that until we reach our own doors. I'll not deny that I'll be glad now when I do. He lit his lanterns and got up. Suddenly he produced a large basket from under the seat. I was nearly forgetting, he said. Mrs. Maggot put this up for Mr. Baggins with her compliments. He handed it down and moved off, followed by a chorus of thanks and good nights. They watched the pale rings of light round his lanterns as they dwindled into the foggy night. Suddenly Frodo laughed. From the covered basket he held, the scent of mushrooms was rising. So they're sent on their way with a gift, and a little joke, a little poke at Frodo and his love of mushrooms from when he was just a lad, as Mr. Maggot would probably put it.
Before he got himself all mixed up with those ne'er-do-wells.
Queer folk from Hobbiton, yeah.
Yeah, and what a beautiful like little side quest that we get. We kind of mentioned the slow pace of the Fellowship of the Ring. I think any modern novel, if they were telling the story, would certainly not include this aside. I mean,
yeah, it's just sort of a silly,
it doesn't really progress the story apart from the fact that we find out that the Black Riders are still sniffing around, which we already know.
Right.
But it just like gives us this little like taste of Hobbit culture. It gives us a sense of like who the hobbits are, their prejudices, their social structure, the things that they like to do. We learn that the hobbits are like really fond of mushrooms. Was just kind of a fun thing that people know about hobbits now.
Yeah.
But it's also this like little mini story of like forgiveness and grace, and good people looking out for each other, and make like kind of going out of their way to do a good deed. Right. And yeah, I'm glad that it wasn't cut, even though his name is super weird.
I am too. I think I wonder if Sam ends up on Farmer Maggot's door by himself, if Farmer Maggot doesn't still treat him the same way that he's treated Frodo and Pippin. And I think as much distrust as there is for, somebody who's just from about something like 40 miles away, that there's still a basic kind of manners that unites people inside the Shire together.
He'd probably still feed him. He may not like bother to learn his name, but
he might not remember his name, but he still might give him a plate of something and a little beer before he sent him on his way. I don't know. As long as he didn't try to eat his mushrooms. So
yeah, as long as he didn't try to steal his mushrooms.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, that was a fun read through of chapter 4.
Yes, it was, and so that brings us to chapter 5, which is A Conspiracy Unmasked. So we'll get into that next week. And we'll look forward to being back with you. So thank you for reading along with us this week. Join us next week for Chapter 5, A Conspiracy Unmasked. If you want to help us out, share this podcast with a Lord of the Rings fan in your life. Follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, and visit waywardwizards.com for more info.
But until next time, remember, shortcuts make delays, but ends make longer ones. See you next week.